And that night he asked, do you know if you're going to heaven? Is that right? Is that what he asked? And Vicki said she could not shake that, you know, that she just did not know for sure that she's going to heaven. And that night she made her adult decision for Jesus Christ. And we got in the car together, and I hadn't seen her for a month or two, something like that. And she said to me, Brent, for the first time in my life, I know what real love is all about. Wow. I said, you finally come to your senses. And then a couple years later, when I was in college, Les Chapman in my home church, we went to Western Kentucky University, which is in Bowling Green, just about 20 miles north of Franklin. So we'd come home a lot and stuff, and on weekends sometimes we would, sometimes we wouldn't. But came in one Sunday morning and sitting in the balcony with Vicki, and he preached from Isaiah, "Here am I, send me." And Les said, "Is there someone here today that feels like God is calling, and you want to say, 'Here am I, send me'?" Well, again, it was one of those thuds, you know. I told Vicki, I said, "I've got to go." So I got up from the balcony of the church and walked all the way down the front and knelt down and said, "Here am I, send me." I give my life to full-time Christian service. I don't know what that means, you know, but here it is, God, I'm yours. And got in the car that day, went back to the house to have lunch, and Mom and Dad and I, we were all talking about what had happened, and I was going into full-time Christian service, and Mother slipped into the other room where there was a big old cedar chest, you know, and lifted it up and handed me a little piece of paper that said, "To Little Preacher Hall." I said, "What's this?" She said, "We asked God to give us a son, and we promised." They had two girls, and then a sister after me, Debbie, who some of you know, said we'd ask God to give us a son, and we promised that if He gave us a son, we'd give him back to Him. And said one of the preachers that helped baptize you gave you a gift, and he put on it, "To Little Preacher Hall." I said, "Why didn't you tell me that?" And Mother said, "Well, I said, "I thought if God was in it, He'd tell you." And said, we've had a few preachers that was called by their mamas, and that didn't work out so well. And beside that, Brent, you're always such a mumbler, I didn't think anybody could hear you if you did preach. So that sort of, that got me where I knew I needed to be. How much time we got? Are y'all okay for a few minutes more? Okay. Huh? Okay. While I was in seminary, I was at Asbury, and I love Asbury Seminary. I didn't pick it because I knew much about theology, or I picked it because, well, you know, I think a few folks from Asbury, some singers had come into our church, and then also it was in Kentucky, and it was close. So I ended up in seminary there. And back in those days, there was a little bit of rift between the seminary and the rest of the conferences and stuff, because it's not really a United Methodist seminary. It's a Wesleyan Arminian theology seminary, if there ever was one, but it's an independent, isn't it? And so I had a district superintendent who didn't like Asbury, let's be honest with you. And so I went to appear in Bowling Green, Kentucky for my, I guess it's license to preach. And I mean, you know, again, I was young. I was probably 22 or something like that. And boy, he raped me over the coals, you know, and I thought, wow, you know, have I gotten a hold of some kind of theological leper, you know, that I should I leave? And when I got through that meeting, you'd have to jack me up to bury me, you know. And I got in the car, and my heart was heavy. And I thought, Lord, I just don't know, you know, should I change seminaries? I really appreciate what I'm getting from Asbury, and I appreciate it more every day, Tom. Teaches you how to be a pastor, doesn't it? And how to follow the Holy Spirit. And and it's a good education too. I mean, And what else? I mean, let's take up an offering for Asbury. But I was just so heavy. And I got on I was getting ready to get on I was going up 65, getting ready to get on the Bluegrass Parkway to go from E-Town, Elizabethtown to Lexington. And there was this kid with long hair, you know, and he was hitchhiking. And folks, I promise you, my mama told me not to pick up hitchhikers. She said it's dangerous, you know. And I didn't, you know, even though I was a Christian. I just, you know, if you was hitchhiking, too bad, buddy. You know, God meant for you to have wheels. You would I never picked up hitchhikers. But God said to me, stop and pick up that boy. And I just remember pulling off the side and thinking, what am I doing? And this kid came with a duffel bag, you know, long hair, and put it in the back of the car, got in me, and we started heading off Bluegrass Parkway, which is just, you know, just as straight as it can be. And you go 90 miles an hour back then, they'd pass you, cars would pass you. And so I started talking, I said, well, what's your name? He said, my name's Jones. And I thought, yeah, you know, he's probably some axe murderer. And I said, what on earth are you doing? He said, well, I graduated from high school early. I graduated in the middle of the year from, I live out in Colorado, around Denver, I think. And I said, well, what are you doing in these parts of the country? He said, well, sir, said, you see, he didn't say sir because I wasn't that much older than he was. He said, you see, every 4 years, the United Methodist Church has something they call General Conference. I said, oh, really? He said, they have a youth caucus for General Conference. And I graduated early from high school, and I've been down in Nashville working on this youth caucus for General Conference. I said, well, why are you going to Lexington? He said, well, my grandfather lives in Lexington. I said, well, what's your dad do? My dad's in education. He wasn't trying to brag or anything. He kind of changed the subject. I said, well, tell me a little bit more. What kind of education? Well, he's in theological education. I said, oh, really? I said, yeah. I said, my dad is Dr. Jameson Jones, the president of Iliff Theological Seminary. What a coincidence. And I said, well, tell me what you believe. Now, folks realize that, you know, I shouldn't have jumped to conclusions that what he believed was necessarily what Jameson believed or what the seminary taught, but I did, and I think God used it, and there probably was some truth to it. Jameson was right squared away, but I'm not sure Iliff was always squared away. But anyway, he said, well, I believe Jesus was a good man, but I don't believe he's the Son of God. And I'm planning to be in communes and stuff. And we talked a little bit, and I ended up taking him on into Lexington instead of going on to Wilmore, and met his granddaddy. His granddaddy picked him up. So I thought, Lord, if that's what Iliff has to offer, I know I'm right where I need to be. And it just gave me the greatest peace that you could imagine. And I think God did that for me. Howard and I were at General Conference 8 years ago, Howard. And Jameson Jones, by the way, Jameson Jones, his dad came and preached at Lake Junaluska, and I went up to Jameson one day. I said, do you have boys? He said, I sure do. I said, do you have boys that hitchhike? He said, do you pick up Scott? I said, yeah. I said, did you pray for your boys? He said, I pray for my boys every day. One of them's now dean at Duke, the other boy. What's his name? I can't think of his first name. But anyway, Scott. Scott Jones was at General Conference. He was head of the delegation, a professor at Perkins School of Theology. His son was making a presentation for the youth caucus. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? And he made his presentation. They're all so smart, it's unbelievable. You know, I feel so dumb around them. But he made a presentation, and the bishop said, now, young man, you're out of order. And the parliamentarian said, no, bishop, you're out of order. He's right. I mean, that's how smart they are. I mean, you know, it was just a wonderful presentation. And the kid looked about the same age that Scott was when I picked him up, you know. So I went over to see Scott, shook hands with him, and I said, you don't remember me, but I certainly remember. And of course, he was head of the delegation, which means he was going to be elected bishop. And he was elected bishop. I went over to him. I said, Scott, I said, have you ever hitchhiked in E-Town? He said, you picked me up, didn't you? I said, yeah. And I said, you don't know the whole story on that. And I told him the story. I said, I thought your theology was so screwy, I knew I was right where I needed to be. And he just laughed, you know. He said, Brent, about a year later, he hitchhiked wherever he went, this kid did. He said, about a year later, I was hitchhiking in Bristol, Tennessee, and a trucker picked me up and said he shared his relationship with Jesus with me. And said, before I got out of that truck, I said, before my feet hit the ground, I want the same God in my heart that he has in his. And he's written all kinds of books. He's a bishop. I called him up one time, wanted to come to Holston to speak, and he was in cabinet meeting. And I said, you owe me one. And I ended up having to cancel him out, but I'll still cash in on that one of these days. Let me say this, and I know we need to move along probably. Let me say a few other things that I know, you know, I know God is real. And I know he moves, and there have been disappointments in my life. Well, we could relate to the story, couldn't we, Vicki? Doctors told us we'd never have any children. We adopted Brandon, which I think God meant for us to do with all my heart. He's been such a blessing. And let me tell you, there's no difference. Once they put that child in your arm, there's no difference between the adopted one and the other two. We adopted him, and 22 months later, Brett came along, and 22 months after that, Brooke came along. And when I got ready to leave Dunlap, somebody came up to me and said, when we went there, Jeep Johnson, what's Philip Johnson, he would come and show up for youth, and he was the only one. You know, we didn't have a youth group, but they said, we want you to grow a youth group. He's the only one to show up. I don't know why he kept showing up. I'd have quit going, but Jeep is that, you know, he was that loyal. He'd show up. And so, but we had some third graders back around, you know, and we started working with third graders. And when we left, we had about 30 in youth group, didn't we? Something like that. And that you were one of those. And I don't know what brought me up to say that. What was I talking about? That's a bad thing about getting, huh? Oh, our children, yeah. And but we really do know Brandon was a special child, top 1% nation intellectually, and is now when Google wants to do something, they go to Brandon and say, "Will you figure out how to do it?" You know. And he just had a son, Isaac, that I baptized on New Year's Day, and his birth father and his birth mother and his grandmother, birth mother were all there. Isn't that something? I told him years ago, I said, son, we love you and you love us, and if you ever want to try to find that, it won't hurt us, you know. And so it's just been wonderful. And Brett's a U.S. Marshal in Louisiana, and big and mean, and just loving with a little boy and a little girl, Brenton, who is 5, and Brianne, we call her Honey Badger, who is 2. And then Brooke is a guidance counselor at the middle school and married to a coach, and she has 2 children, a stepson who's 15 and a little boy, Noah, who is 3. And so God has blessed us beyond measure. God also works in the church. I'm going to take about 5 more minutes. Is that okay, folks? You need to stand up. Let me tell you ways in which I've seen God work in church over the years. Moved to Radford, Virginia several years ago after I left First Broad Street as Minister of Discipleship. And we were going through the Vision 2000. We did a thing of planning, projecting for the future. And we met in 4 sessions and made our plans. And in the last session, we were in the fellowship hall and the glass windows all around, nice fellowship hall. And we were joining hands and having prayer. And we'd mapped out a strategy for growth in the community, you know. And one of the people said, well, you know, everybody knows we need that property next door, but Mrs. Prater, she's not Methodist, and And you know, she's probably not going to ever sell us that property, so I guess we won't see that happen. So we prayed, and we just had our little prayer and said, God, it's in your hands. And next thing you know, the next day I was, after lunch, lunchtime, and I got in my car and got ready to head out, and Miss Prater was outside, and she's waiting for me. And she said, preacher, I don't look too smart, but I got plenty of sense, and I know that if anybody needs this property, you all do. Now, I'm Lutheran, I ain't Methodist, and I ain't going to give it to you, but I'll sell it to you for a fair price. I said, Miss Prater, did somebody from the Vision 2000 team talk to you last night? Vision 2000? I didn't talk to anybody last night. I don't know what you're talking about. It just came clear in my mind last night, about 9 o'clock, that this is what I need to do. And I tell you what, I started calling people, and we started buying property. And we knew it was God. We knew it was God. When I went to Asbury in Greenville, beautiful old church, looks like my home church in Franklin, Kentucky. But I took the first night, I met with the administrative board, and I said, how many of y'all have been down to your children's department? And a lot of them were older on the administrative board, and they hadn't been down there. I said, you need to go down there. Let's look this over. I said, you got grandkids, and would you want them to really want them in this? I said, think about young couples. What would they do? And so we said, well, we need to fix it up. And I said, you need to start a preschool too. That's a great port of entry. So we were going to see if we could. Well, the licensing group said, there's no way you'll have a preschool. You can fix it up for Sunday school, but there's no way you can have a preschool there. And my feathers fell, because that is a great ministry and a great port of entry into the life of the church. And so I thought, oh Lord, that's really a bummer. There were two old maid school teachers and the Gardner sisters. And when they had done the last renovation of the church, they didn't give anything to the church. They said, no, we're not going to, but we might someday. And then one lady died before I got there, and then Miss Katie died after I was there, and I was told that she had left something to the church, a little over $1 million to the church, and well, it really left everything they had to the church. And so we built a state-of-the-art preschool. We went and looked all over the state, and the Gardner Center, was built. Then went down from there to Brainerd, and they had some plans that the choir director, Ron Starnes, showed me plans. He said, we drew these plans 20 years ago to change the sanctuary, and said people told us that if we did that, they would leave the church. I said, well, I think it's time to find out if they mean it or not. And we ended up doing a major renovation and we didn't need more space, but we needed more user-friendly space at Brainerd. As one person said, one thing for sure, they never intended for you to grow old here, you have to go from the gym to no elevators and all this stuff. So we made it more user-friendly, and that worked out in a great way. And the fellow that did the building for us is a member of the church, and every now and then he'd call me over and say, Brent, let's go to the sanctuary. And we go to the sanctuary and pray. And we didn't lose that many people. We had one family that said, we're going somewhere else. I just don't like to be challenged. And I said, well, where are you going? I'm going down to First Centenary. I said, I know their pastor there. He'll challenge you too. I found out later on that they just watched it on TV, and when you start challenging them, I guess you turn them off. So, and then we stayed there for 7 years and moved to Concord. Walked in, and they had a big plan of what they wanted to do. They talked about relocating, but they wanted to buy 8 houses around there. And that your assignment is, if you choose to take this, is to buy those houses. And we ended up building a $6.5 million addition, and we just owed just a little over $3 million on it. And for a church that size, we'll have it paid for before too awful long. But I started going around the houses, and a little problem. Nobody wanted to sell their house. Nobody. And I remember walking back into my office and saying, God, if this is going to happen, you're going to have to change hearts. and also met with a few key people in the church and trustees and said, now, if these people don't want to move, you can't just give them normal price for it. I said, you don't need to give inflated, but you're going to have to sweeten the pot a little bit. And he, you know, said, but when none of them were exorbitant. But it was amazing how I'd get calls, and in 5 years we purchased all 8 of those houses. And the last house to be purchased, we were told that we could not speak to the old gentleman there, because you know what happened? Concord Baptist had bought his house, and when he bought that house, he asked the fellow that sold it to him, is that church planning to expand? He said, no, sir. So they're talking about relocating. He said, okay. And so we were told I could never, ever talk to that guy. And I thought, well, you know, we had all the other houses and that one piece of property. I said, Lord, what are you doing? I mean, this is impossible. But one of the neighbors said, I do know his son. His son's an accountant here in Knoxville, and said, you might talk to him. And one day, Tim Priest, anybody know who Tim Priest is? Tim Priest is a color commentator, you know, and he's a Hall of Fame in Knoxville football player. Still has the record for the most interceptions or something run back or something like that. I forget now what it is, but anyway, he's a real deal, and he's a great Christian. I've been a member of Concord United Methodist. He's a lawyer. He's an attorney. He called me up one day and said, Brent, let's go talk to that guy. And I said, okay, Tim, let's go talk to the guy. We went to talk to the guy, and little did we know that that guy was an avid Vols fan. And for Tim Priest to walk in and talk to him, and we spent 45 minutes talking about football, UT football. And about 5 minutes, if you ever think you could help us with getting that property, and we did that about 4 or 5 times that year. And every time it was an hour talking football and 5 minutes a year. The last time we went, he said, my dad's hard-headed. Said the last time he sold the property to the Baptist church, they went down for closing, and he raised it $25,000.